We all know that China is a dictatorship. We know that heinous things go on within Chinese borders, that Uyghur Muslims are abused, sterilized, and murdered daily, that democracy is eroded away in Hong Kong every week, and that social credit systems make people prisoners in their own homes. But much of what happens within the Chinese government is actually incredibly obscure and hidden from the outside world. If you ask anyone who runs China, their answer is almost definitely going to be Xi Jinping, and they would be right. But ask who the second in command is, or even who anyone else in the top level leadership positions are, and the chances are they just won't know. The truth is that we, outside of the CCP, have never truly known just how centralized power is within the Communist Party, how much influence Xi Jinping actually holds, and whether or not he really is the newest emperor in the world. Over the last few months though, we've been getting more and more information that has finally culminated in the closest thing to a coup in Chinese history in the best part of a century. Jintao, China's leader from 2002 to 2012, was just escorted away from China's National Congress in a very public way, in what is likely to be an end to his public life and maybe even his life as a whole. This has followed months of speculation surrounding the security of Xi Jinping's leadership, rumors of coups and chaos across China that has seen their housing market collapse, and hundreds of millions of people locked down by the most authoritarian superpower we've ever seen. Today, we're going to establish exactly what just happened and look at why the Chinese stock market just had its worst single-day performance in almost a decade, far worse than we ever saw during the COVID pandemic, with the Golden Dragon Index cratering 14% and losing $93 billion worth of value over a matter of hours. So this event was called the National Congress of China, and it happens once every 5 years. For our purposes, we can see it as an opportunity for new government officials to move into office, to move up, or to be kicked out altogether. Of course, China is not a democracy, all positions are decided by the state, but this is kind of the closest thing we see to an election in China. The focus of this year's National Congress was on whether or not Xi Jinping was going to be granted another term as the president of China, which was, to be honest, mostly expected at this point. Back in 2018, the law stated that a Chinese president could only serve 2 terms or 10 years in power, and as Xi came to power in 2012, his tenure should have just ended. But in 2018, Xi pushed through new legislation that abolished that rule and allowed him to remain president indefinitely. This was the first Congress since that rule was passed, so all eyes were on China to see the state of the country and just whether or not Xi had managed to seize control of it forever. Another 5 years seemed truly on the cards, and in the run-up to this Congress, Xi was really seen as more of an emperor of China as opposed to just some lowly head of state. Now, something to note is that the actual politics for this event are decided months ahead of schedule. Everyone goes into the event knowing exactly what will happen. It's all televised and incredibly tightly choreographed, so everything happens for a reason. The first topic to cover is, of course, whether or not Xi actually got his desired 3rd term in power, and the answer was yes. He received a unanimous vote in favor from the 200 odd people who actually got a say, which was exactly what he was looking for. When he came to speak though, he clearly had an agenda. Xi spoke about the state of China and the government when he took control back in 2012, and essentially, he made it clear that the previous administration was, in his eyes, weak, corrupt, and ineffectual, and under his leadership, the state has increased control and been wildly successful. Now, this is actually true to an extent. Xi's predecessor was Jintao, who allowed free speech to establish a small but noticeable foothold in China, and also allowed capitalism to take hold. Hu also allowed government corruption to be reported on by the media, and at the end of his 2nd term, he voluntarily stepped down instead of trying to change the rules as Xi has done. But first, a quick message from this video's sponsor, me. The last video I uploaded to this channel actually got killed and demonetized by YouTube because they didn't like me talking about the CCP and exposing their crimes. The truth is that big tech hate this type of content, and there is so much more that I simply can't talk about here on YouTube. That's why I put together Stoic Financial Freedom on an entirely independent platform that is immune to this type of censorship. I explain everything about the markets that you need to know, how it all really works, how to invest and make your money work for you, not against you, and extra insights and footage into these videos that YouTube won't allow to be posted. You also get full insights into my investments and buy and sell alerts and a direct message line to me personally so we can chat. I've even set up a 15% discount code for the first 3 signups today only, so use code EMPEROR at checkout to save some cash. Again, that's EMPEROR for 15% off for the first 3 people today. Thank you all for the support and stay stoic. To those who lived through Hu's tenure in China, freedom wouldn't be the first thing that springs to mind, but in comparison to the China we know today, that is how it's often seen. Xi changed the script, and he said that the leadership before he took control was weak, hollow, and watered down. This was all while Hu was sitting nervously next to him as previous premier of the Chinese Communist Party. He is still a huge name and held much prestige, which is why he was granted such a valuable seat next to Xi. But then this here happened. One of Xi Jinping's personal bodyguards walked into the Congress in front of the entire country and world and started bringing the elderly and frail Hu to his feet. Hu resists and tries to grab hold of some papers on his desk before Xi Jinping firmly stops him. A second bodyguard comes to assist in removing Hu. All the while, party officials and generals stare forward, terrified of even acknowledging what is happening. Li Shanzhu, one of the most powerful people in China, stood up to aid Hu, but his chief strategist pulled down on his jacket to get him to stop. Finally, as Hu is being escorted away, he tries to speak to Xi, supposedly to try and find out what this is all about. It is all in vain though, as Xi simply nods his head, ordering his guards to continue with what they're doing. No excuse or explanation of this event was given by the Chinese state, and Hu Jintao's name and legacy has already been scrubbed away from the Chinese internet. Censorship has come into effect in full force, ensuring that no one in China is able to even mention what happened, but the incredibly public nature of this move ensures that everyone knows what actually went down. It's very hard to state just how ridiculously important this event will turn out to be. Xi has spent his last 10 years in power consolidating his influence and ensuring that he remains unchallenged. Hu has slowly but surely seen his old allies stripped of their powers, humiliated, and often even executed, but the world seemed to believe that Hu would make it through this purge. He was 79 years old, he willingly gave up power over a decade ago and has made no attempt to re-enter politics, even as everything he stood for has come under attack. He seemed more than happy to sit quietly as a party grandee and to let Xi do what he wanted, but Xi was clearly not convinced that was enough. This was an incredibly public humiliation and display of power, and I personally can see only 2 real possible reasons for what happened. The first is that this was all orchestrated from the start, from the outset, and it was always going to happen. Xi wanted every other party grandee and old-timer to know that he will not tolerate any dissent at all, and if he can do that to Hu, he can do it to everyone else too. The other possibility is that this was arranged somewhat last minute under the belief that Hu was going to do the unthinkable and vote against giving Xi his illegal 3rd term as president. He may have mentioned the slightest offhand comment to any number of people, and whispers may have made their way to the top that indicate Hu was unhappy with what Xi has done. After all, when Hu had passed his 2nd term, he followed protocol and willingly gave up power, supposedly to try and maintain the integrity of the Chinese political system. It's not at all unreasonable to believe that Hu may have been unhappy with Xi's refusal to do the same. That, though, I'm afraid, is mostly speculation. What we do know for sure is that Hu is gone. His existence is no longer acknowledged by the Chinese state, and in some sinister Stalinist way, the CCP will likely do everything they can to write him out of history altogether. Xi's power in China is totally unrivaled, and there stands no one in his way whatsoever. He's also willing to use his power, to use his influence to ensure he maintains it, and that spells disaster for the Chinese markets. This, fundamentally, is the reason stocks have crashed across China following this silent coup. If Xi is willing to publicly humiliate and erase from history one of the most powerful men in China, the chances are that his attacks on business, markets, and entrepreneurs in China are going to continue as well. Investors love one thing above all else: predictability. If an investor knows for sure what's going to happen next, they can find a million different ways to make money, but instability or unpredictability presents a polar opposite problem. If you don't even know which government official is going to be executed or disappeared next, how could you possibly know how the government is going to regulate your industry? If you don't even know why an ex-president was just erased from history, how can you possibly know that your own CEO will be allowed to run his company as efficiently as possible? Confidence had already been waning in the Chinese markets for years because of the insane rise of authoritarianism in China. Companies like Didi, Ant Group, Alibaba, and Tencent have been attacked by the CCP, fined billions of dollars, and even banned from operating at all, and this brand new development means that all of that is going to get worse, not better. The Chinese markets right now are sitting lower than they ever were during the COVID pandemic, and we're seeing brand new decade lows. I'm sure I don't need to remind you what China has done in the past to destroy business, but I will alert you as to what might happen in the future. Xu's reign as Chinese president was characterized by economic growth and capitalism at all costs. To be clear, he wasn't actually a supporter of free speech. He wasn't actually a supporter of exposing government corruption. He was merely so obsessed with increasing the levels of enterprise in China to make himself and the entire country richer that he allowed those things to grow and thrive. He allowed reporters to expose Communist Party corruption because he was simply too busy deregulating the financial markets. He allowed free speech to grow because he was simply too busy encouraging the construction industry to boom. Xi is making an explicit attempt right now to right what he considers wrongs. He thinks that what Xu did was a mistake and that the power and the authority of both himself and the party should come at the expense of wealth. Xi does not care if the next trillion-dollar businesses are not made in China, as long as the party remains in control of those businesses that do spring up. Xi does not care if billionaires run away from China, taking their businesses and their wealth with them, as long as the ones who remain know who's boss. Xi does not care if the stock market crashes and burns, as long as he is the emperor of the ashes that remain. We, as YouTubers and those who watch YouTube, have a tendency to look to great investors to try and gauge where we should put our money. Over recent years, Ray Dalio, Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, and many others, some of the best investors to ever exist, have thrown billions of dollars into China on the bet that enterprise will thrive and their billions will turn into trillions. But those investors have all, to a T, been wrong. Now, I'm not trying to claim that I'm a better investor than any of those men. I don't even come close to coming close. But I am saying that these people are investors and not foreign policy strategists. They are men who are obsessed with seeing the numbers on their financial statements go up, and they have never coveted any kind of political power. These investors are men who fundamentally don't understand who Xi Jinping is and what he actually wants, and they will never understand him. Xi Jinping is a figure more akin to Napoleon, Julius Caesar, or Alexander the Great, someone who doesn't care about money or earthly desires. He wants to build an empire and rule over it. He will never allow something so pathetic as money to come in the way of that. Now, I've been making videos on China for over a year now, and my position has always been absolutely clear. With a dictatorship, with a lack of freedom in China, it means the country is not a safe investing environment. Now, when I said this 18 months ago, I received loads of flack on YouTube. Alibaba, Didi, and Tencent fanatics told me that I'm insane. But those people who are silly enough to trust the Communist Party to have been invested in that market have been hammered over the entire last year and a half. Now it is 100% clear what is going on, but be careful trusting what many YouTubers will now say. Most of those agreeing with me now called me an idiot years ago. Most people's memories are short and we find these things easy to forget. These people encouraged you to invest in China, so don't let them off so easily. Hold them to account, remember their mistakes, and consider if they're likely making any similar mistakes right now. And until next time, stay stoic.